All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we've got a full room. Let you all find your seats.
We're so obedient.
Yeah, good job, folks.
Can you imagine? It's never like this.
All right, welcome to our second part in our three-part series for WomanUP in Action. WomanUP working with our policy team. This is Policy on Tap. If you've not been to Policy on Tap, this is our quarterly event where you get to come hear about a policy issue, you get a free beer, you get to hear from local experts, so a great time. Today, you're going to hear from a group of folks on early childhood education and childcare. First part in the series, we heard from folks working in that system. Today, you're going to hear from a Wells Fargo economist. You're going to hear from local employers and some other folks on how this issue affects them and their workforce. First, I want to thank all of our sponsors because this is a joint WomanUP policy and I think Small Business Week event. We've got a lot of sponsors. I'm going to highlight two of them. Allen Stahl and Kilbourne is our presenting sponsor for Policy on Tap. Alicia, if you want to come on up and give a quick welcome.
Hey, thank you. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to this Policy on Tap Mother's Day edition.
I am Alicia and I work with Allen Stahl and Kilbourne, which for those of you who aren't familiar, we are a law firm here in town that focuses on business but is full service. We have 15 attorneys, lots of fabulous paralegals and support staff that make us look good. And I've been working with Allen. Ask law is easier to say, as long as you don't say it quickly. Because then it sounds like something else. But I've been working with Ask for about 2 years. I worked with them a little bit prior to that. Prior to coming to the law firm, I have 2 restaurants in town, so I'm a small business owner. And so this topic, which is one of the reasons that we sponsor these events, is we really like to participate in things that are important to us as a firm and then also important to our clients. And we appreciate the Chamber for hosting these and also White Labs for continuing to do so. As a mother, I have certainly made lots of decisions based on my children's care. And so left a job at Asheville High School because it was too expensive for them to have childcare. Decided naively to go into business for myself because then I could have a flexible schedule with my children and my baby daddy, which just meant I worked all the time. And then waited until my younger son was in his last year of high school to go to law school. So childcare is particularly important, and then for businesses and then also for the folks working in them. So I think this is a great topic and we really are happy to be here and happy to sponsor.
And from WomanUP, her 2 cents, Faith or Laura?
Yeah.
Or both.
Well, it costs her 2 cents. You're gonna get her 2 cents. So, Laura Webb, Faith Dole from Web Investment Services, and we also have a podcast, Her 2 Cents, which is all about normalizing the conversation around money with women. And when you're talking about childcare and women and money, all these things go together. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to support this.
Absolutely, and a big thing for us is financial independence, specifically for women. It's really hard to have independence when you don't have childcare. Obviously, that's a working parent issue, not just a woman's issue. A lot of times it falls to the woman, but it's not just a working parent or woman issue. It is a community issue. If you employ people, childcare is a big problem for them if they have kids. If there's not enough or access or it's not affordable, then they're not going to be very good employees for you because they won't be showing up. So all these things are very important, but it definitely goes to our passion of helping to normalize the conversation about money between women, and you can't forget about childcare when you talk about that.
So, Stan, you can go and follow us and participate, and we want to hear about topics that you want to talk about from Her 2 Cents, our podcast. So thank you.
Thank y'all. And if I could get our panel to come up and grab a seat. Sarah, you can come on up too, and I'll give you the clicker. anywhere you'd like, and then once we've done a quick presentation, I'm actually going to slide our seats in a little bit. I'm going to let our panel introduce ourselves, starting with Sarah.
All right, hello everyone. I'm Sarah House. I'm a senior economist with Wells Fargo.
I'm Bailey Abra. I'm the HR director at Gibbons Estates.
I'm Carla Barnard. I'm a commercial broker and the owner of Carla & Company Real Estate Services.
I'm Melissa Wiedemann. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Live Western North Carolina.
Good afternoon, my name is Himanshu Karvir. I'm President and CEO of Virtelle Hospitality.
All right, so this is our panel. Sarah is going to start us off with about 15 or 20 minutes of some really in-depth information, a study that Kit has shared with a lot of you all probably over the last 6 months. I know that when I came to the chamber, this is not an issue that I thought I would be working on, and Kit hit me with this study like probably within the first week, and I knew that this would be an issue that we would be working on. So turn it over to you, Sarah, and you can use your clicker to go one over, and there you are.
Sounds good. All right, well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to be here with you and share about this topic. So my kind of day-to-day job is I'm more of a macroeconomist, so I focus a lot on, all right, what's GDP going to print this upcoming quarter? What are, how quick is consumer spending growing? Are we heading for a recession? What's inflation doing? What's the Fed going to do? But also cover labor markets, and with that, we look at a lot of different groups of different consumers, different types of households, and really looking, we like to time from time look at issues specific to certain groups and see how that's kind of affecting and playing into broader economic themes. So last March with Women's History Month, we did this report looking at childcare industry and how that's affecting women in the economy and the labor market more broadly. And I think, really it was the intersection of what we're seeing in the cycle, but also some longer term challenges. And as has already been mentioned, this isn't just women's issues or challenges, this is really broader than that. And so that's why we wanted to bring this to attention and, to our clients as well. This is a bigger than just women. So it affects fathers, really any caregivers, but also employers. So that's where I want to start out with, is just thinking about where we are in the current economic cycle. So we are in the tightest labor market we have seen in decades. So the unemployment rate right now is matched with a 53-year low, so the really lowest rate we've seen since 1969. You have 1.6 job openings for every unemployed person, so more openings than you have even people looking for work. If you look at small businesses and how many of them are saying they're having trouble filling at least one job, so we still have about 45% of small businesses saying they can't find enough workers. And so that data goes back to the mid-1970s, and you can see that's still higher than at any point since that series started more than 40 years ago. So we're still in a labor crunch right now. And with that, that's adding to the inflationary pressures that we're seeing. So right now inflation is growing more than twice the Fed's target. The Fed's raising rates rapidly. There's a lot of consternation and concerns about, are we headed for a recession, given that the Fed is actively trying to dampen demand to cool inflation and get us to a more stable environment where we don't have to think about price growth so much, and we can go back to more of our daily lives, daily business. Now, the benign way out of cooling these labor pressures would be increased supply. So the Fed, they're not really in the side of they're not in the role of kind of figuring out the supply side. Their tools work on demand. So that's what the Fed's going after. But we'd really like to see more labor supply to help cool these inflationary pressures. More supply of other things too, but labor is a huge one right now, just given how tight that labor market is. So we can see, supply chains kind of go back to normal, ships no longer waiting off the Port of LA or Long Beach, but you're going to have these inflation pressures so long as this labor market remains really tight. So we've seen labor supply begin to come back, so you can see the participation rate. It's almost back to where it was, but it's been a slow recovery, and part of that has to do with just the nature of this cycle. So the fact that we did dole out a lot of fiscal support, so everything from multiple rounds of stimulus to very generous unemployment insurance, and households weren't spending as much in the early days of the pandemic, so households came out of this recession in kind of oddly good financial shape, which might have impacted how quickly some people had to go to work. Now in terms, there's the health issues, of course, too. But there's also some longer term secular challenges. So everything from just aging population, so that depresses participation as you have more of your population in retirement years. Social issues, everything from incarceration to substance abuse factoring into this as well. But then there's also this issue of care, which I think is both cyclical, given the nature of the pandemic, all the social distancing, schools closed, etc. That's also a longer term challenge too. So in many ways we've seen this care system really not working for anyone. So both, whether it's parents or providers. So when we think about really who needs care, so just to kind of give you some context in terms of the size. So about 28 million workers have children under 6. And so that's about 22% of what we call prime age workers. So basically you're 25 to 54, that's just really the core of your labor force. And of course, a lot of people cycle in through this period. So if you look at women in their 40s, about 85% have had a child. So maybe it's only roughly a quarter of prime age workers need it right now, but most people need this at some point in their working lives. But we see that, especially when it comes to women, that having young children takes a big hit in terms of labor force participation. So if you look at women under age 6, with a child under age 6, and again, so women with at least one child under age 6, so the participation rate is only 67%. If you look at men with a kid under 6, 94%, so 27 percentage point drop. So again, this does affect fathers, it affects the whole household. It affects any primary caregiver. But let's face it, disproportionately this still falls on women. So that's in part because you have women are 5 times more likely to be single parents, to have to deal with childcare on their own. But also just from the fact that there's still a pretty big pay gap, roughly about 80% for men versus women. And so if someone has to sit out, it makes financial sense usually for the women to do it. Now, there's also some social norms in here involved as well. But if we just think about that availability of affordable, reliable childcare, which I think the pandemic reminded us school is. So you can see that with women with school-age children, 6 to 17. So put social norms aside between men and women who should take care of their kids. You see that participation rate among women with school-age kids. So again, reliable, affordable childcare, about 10 percentage points higher. So there's that huge gap in kind of that availability that depresses that participation rate. So if you got this group of women to have participation rates just with this woman, never mind men, you have 1 million more workers in the labor force. So it's a big effect. Okay, so why do we have this lower participation rate? Well, probably no surprise to really anyone who's been following this is that childcare is really, really expensive. So if you look at, let's just do in-home or daycare centers, so kind of those standalone facilities. So the average cost nationally is $10,000 a year for the in-home, or $12,000 for a standalone. That's the average. So if you get into cities where either you've had a lot of population growth, it's just been hard for those facilities to keep up, it's a lot more. So doing this report, I crunched the numbers of what I pay. It is, so Charlotte, it's a little dicey up there. You can see, roughly 10% of income for married couples. This is against 2021, where you had kind of nice, a little more government support to income. So this is actually probably a little bit low compared to what it was back in pre-COVID times. If you're a single parent, 20 to 26%, depending on that. If you have 2 kids, goodness, under 6, it's pretty similar to single parents. So it's not that different from a second mortgage to have to pay for this care. Now, why is it so expensive? Well, it's a low productivity, labor intensive field. This is not something we can automate our way out of. This is not, putting more technology into an assembly line and boom, we have these, much nicer cars for roughly the same price, or TVs for even lower price, and they do a heck of a lot more. So there are strict ratios when it comes to care for good reason. So sure, you could put more kids in a facility and they'd probably be safe, but you'd have also, maybe they're just parked in front of a show or something to keep things relatively calm. That's not the same quality, so that's commensurate with higher costs. And so what we've seen is childcare costs, so this is from the CPI, so this is effectively households out of pocket, has grown about 1.5 times faster than household income, or prices for other products where there is productivity involved, which does help hold down that cost. And so it's grown a lot more expensive for households. It's outpaced that income. So it's really burdensome for parents. And so that makes it difficult for these facilities to raise price. But given how labor intensive it is, it still doesn't pay that well for employees. And so these centers work on very thin margins too, just because it already is so expensive. If you raise prices too much, you get people either just, it's not worth it, they drop out, or, well, I'll just pay a little bit more and just get a nanny and get more one-on-one care. So it's a very tough space to work in. And you can see just how low paying it is so with these childcare workers in the daycare industry. So think of this as more, kind of your under threes, if your threes are under, basically $30,000 a year, $14 an hour. So that puts them in the bottom decile of pay for workers, on par with like dishwashers, front desk workers of hotels. So very, very low pay. It's also really hard work. You're on your feet all day. You're picking up after kids, lots of little kids. If anyone has kids, little kid ever had kids, you know how much stuff they leave around and the chaos that ensues. Diapering, potting, petri dishes in the best of times, let alone COVID times. So understandably, turnover is pretty high, and it's tough to keep people in this. If you're in preschool, you get a little bit more, but if you get maybe just a little bit more education, you get in a public kindergarten spot, you're raising your pay significantly. So it's tough to attract and keep people in this very low pay, hard job. More recently too, we've also seen some of that pay premium get compressed with other industries that are pretty easy to get into, that don't require background checks, maybe don't require specific certificates too. So for example, if you look back coming out of the last cycle, childcare, this blue line here, it paid roughly 20% more than what you would get paid if you worked in leisure and hospitality. Now it's on par. Don't have to wipe anyone's nose. Now, if you look at general merchandise, so basically your Targets, your Walmarts, it was paying roughly the same, but now that industry is paying about a 15% premium. So it's, again, really tough to get people in this, let alone when you factor in all the health concerns of pandemic, post-pandemic environment. All right, so what are we left with? Well, we're left with still roughly 5% fewer daycare workers in the country than we had before COVID. So this is even as you've had broader employment move, it's been above where it was before COVID for more than a year now. So that equates to about 54,000 workers. And remember, there are strict ratios here, so that directly affects capacity. So if you take the low end, like infant care, say a 1-to-4 ratio, so you're looking at 215 fewer thousand spots there. If you take maybe a higher end, preschool, pre-K, 1-to-10 ratio or so, and that's 540,000 spots. That's a lot of families that there's just not the same capacity as there was for care. So a recent study showed 46% of facilities aren't at capacity because they can't find workers. So this is a very small industry, less than 1% of total employment, but it's amplified across the broader economy by allowing other industries to find their workers. So kind of packs an outsized punch is how I like to think about it. Okay, so cost is very burdensome to parents, still low pay for workers, making it tough to have enough available care. So what about more cost sharing? Well, I'd say importantly, we do cost share when it comes to education, or again, let's face it, childcare. If anyone had young school-age children during the pandemic, again, school is childcare. So if you look at the U.S. in terms of our share spending relative to GDP on primary and secondary, so basically elementary and high school, and then tertiary, which is college, we spend roughly as much as the OECD average. So other advanced economies, we funnel as much, roughly as much of our, relative to the size of our economy, into supporting that education. There's also a lot of cost sharing there. So K through 12 education is free. It's publicly available. You have other taxpayer buy-in, even whether they're sending their kids to school or not, whether they even have kids. But it's a very different picture when it comes to childcare and early child education. So we only spend about half the OECD average when it comes to early childcare. So there's this, it's not that we're totally unwilling, but there is just this gap when it comes to those first few years where you just don't have as much of support. Now there is support, so there's federal programs like Head Start. That's the really biggest one that's channeled at early child care. But that's really geared more towards families in poverty, so really at the extreme end. You have the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, so that is geared more towards younger kids, but it's still pretty small. So it's only about $600 per year. So that doesn't buy me 2 weeks at my 3-year-old's school. So it's a drop, it's a drop in the bucket. So, great, I'll take it, but it still doesn't solve the problem. You do have the child tax credit, but that's not really geared towards younger children specifically. A 17-year-old gets it as well. So it's not really tiered. We had it briefly tiered under the American Rescue Plan, but all of those kind of family support programs didn't get included in the resurrected Build Back Better that was the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's still just not a lot of cost sharing when it comes to the early childhood sector. Different states do different things, so there is some varied support there. Some states don't do anything. There's about 6 states where you don't have even any funding for pre-K. Other states you get pretty good enrollment in state-funded pre-K, so like up to 70%. So that's kind of in some ways the lower hanging fruit of this, where so even if you can just get one year earlier where they get support, can make it a little bit more feasible on families. But really we see this more of an incremental change where you had states and localities doing pretty well post coming out of the pandemic, where the economy bounced back. You had a lot of federal government support, but the issue with these programs is it's a reoccurring expense, so it's really difficult for states, localities to plan around. So it seems like it's going to be probably more of a status quo environment. So I started with kind of why this matters right now in the current economic cycle in the very tight labor market, but this is also a long-term problem. Just like we didn't get here overnight with these care challenges either, and these labor force participation dynamics. And it's important too as we think about not just where we are in the current cycle, but population growth and future labor force growth. So you can see here on this chart. So the working age population, so 60 to 64, is only estimated to grow about 0.2% over the remainder of this decade. So that's about half the rate of what we saw in the last cycle, which was half the rate of what we saw in the previous cycle. And so basically, if you're going to keep that labor supply growth at a pretty good rate, you're going to need much higher participation. And access to affordable, reliable care has consistently shown that boosts women's labor force participation. So that does boost the labor supply. But it's not just in terms of where we are here short term, it's also where we're going long term, just what's that future population growth looking like. Well, we've seen lower fertility rates over recent decades, and especially over the past decade. And then the research also links that just affordable childcare, it can create smaller families where you're maybe on the cusp, and the extreme cost maybe that tips you to not maybe have that second, third, etc. child. So this is a challenge too for the longer term population growth. So not just short term issues for employers, but also future issues for employers in terms of that labor supply down the road. So bringing it back a little bit more towards where I spend a lot of my time in, just overall GDP growth and what's potential growth. Why does this all matter? Labor is an input to production. Sure, you can add more capital, but someone is usually still having to run those machines or service those machines. So labor is still an important part of growth. Productivity matters, but human capital is very important in that too. And so all sorts of education, even at the very younger years, plays into that. So we're looking like we're in for a period of slower growth. Productivity is a little bit of a wild card, but that labor side we can see pretty clearly, and it's not pointing towards very strong growth. Also in terms of the fiscal dynamics, very important. So we're a graying society, and what we've seen is the old age dependency ratio has increased about 50% over the past decade or so, and it's set to continue increasing at a pretty hefty rate here over the next 10 to 15 years or so, and basically almost double from where we were back in 2010. So we need that influx of younger people. We need that population growth to help in this dynamic where I get a lot of utility out of my children, but in some ways they're future taxpayers. Let me hope, and they're gonna hopefully be supporting everyone through their tax dollars, not just funding my retirement directly via finance.
I'm not following that. What does
So basically you have the ratio of people over 65 or older relative to the rest of the population. So.
And the dependency means?
Just working age people to pay into the tax system to fund all of these fun things like major healthcare programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc. So this is the track we're on for the current budget deficit, the overall debt relative to GDP. This is, by the way, under current law, assumes no future recession between now and 2015. So, we'll see how that goes. But a lot of that comes from big programs, the entitlement spending side too. And so I think when we think about increasing spending on childcare, so if you were to increase it to the OECD average, that would be about an extra $100 billion a year. So that's very visible. We can see that that's going to come either at the expense of we're going to have to maybe spend less on other programs, we're going to have to raise taxes, or we're going to have to issue more debt and have more of these debt ceiling squabbles that do no one any good. But when we think about the implicit costs, those are harder to see. When we think about that lower participation, the fact that businesses can't grow as fast, that you don't have as many people paying into the tax system because either they're not working, they're staying home to take care of kids, or they're having smaller families, and that's hurting that that future tax base as well. So I think we have to think about the explicit costs, but also recognize that there are also implicit costs to the system as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I can turn things over to the panel.
Yeah, thank you so much there. I'll take and we can scoot in so everybody can see you if you all don't mind. We are going to go from the macro to the micro, if I remember my economics from undergrad, which I think I did. And we're going to start down at the end with Himanshu. We just heard, some really high-level stuff. Tell us why you care about this, how it affects your sector.
Before I do start, Kid kind of looked at me, so you feel like the odd person up here.
I asked if you felt any pressure.
I don't feel any pressure.
Okay.
Right. When Kid asked me to come sit on this panel, without thinking, I said yes. So for us, we've been in the hospitality and tourism industry. We've been in here about 40 years in Nashville, and obviously, for all the reasons that were stated before, our labor pool, even in you talk about the United States, but just looking at Buncombe County, Nashville, our unemployment is far lower, the lowest in the state, and we see that in our hiring. We've got consistently, we're fully employed, we're about 220 employees, and right now, if you look, we're about 25 to 30 short, and that's consistent. And we, it's because of since the post-pandemic, we haven't been able to staff up, and I think part of the big reason, is the lack of affordable childcare or just childcare in general. So it is very important, and I've got some more thoughts on the policy side of things, but as far as the employment goes, it's hard to find people right now. It's hard to be, and that puts pressure on the people that are working for us. So where we have a housekeeping staff that fully staffed is 18, we only have 12, or front desk staff, they're paying more shifts, they're doing more work. So it's a balance that we have to hit, and it's a struggle right now.
We can keep coming down. Yeah. How you're affected, how you're connected to the issue.
So my role in the YMCA, I oversee about 30 childcare centers.
and across a couple of counties, and we pre-pandemic were struggling to fully staff our facilities, but we were essentially able to meet community need. Since the pandemic, we have about 400 kids on a wait list, and so I think the way that it impacts me the most is I'm the person that everyone is calling, all our school systems are calling, and then surrounding counties, because all of their child care centers are closing, and the issue is staffing. And so hearing parents, hearing school social workers, because we provide licensed child care, free child care to a lot of families in need, as the why, and just hearing all of these stories about, because when child care isn't available, sometimes people can't work, also sometimes kids just are home alone, or they're sitting in the car while their parents work. So it becomes a serious crisis in terms of quality of life for children in our community, and it's kind of heartbreaking.
Hi, I'm Carla. So I am a commercial real estate broker. It's a small business, and I am impacted by this in multiple ways. I have a 4.5-month-old and was not able to secure a place in a daycare despite signing up at 5 months pregnant. And I'm only able to attend today because I managed to secure 4 days of part-time daycare, and I happen to have a partner that works from home, and we're sort of over leveraging that. So there's that issue, and that's not we even need affordable childcare, just like anything would do. It's a broad spectrum issue. As a small business, we're impacted by it on the recruitment level and on a retention level. We've had some depressing situations where we've identified very talented people who want to join, and we just can't find a way to make it happen because of their childcare situation. And we had one recently which precipitated us actually going to KIT to rage against the machine. I work in commercial real estate, which is very male dominated, tends to be an older crowd and very few females, and I had a young, very, very talented, smart lady who wanted to work in the more rural counties, which do not have a lot of commercial real estate brokers, and we just couldn't get over the hump of the childcare situation to get her into a training program, and that was super, super depressing, and it's not an isolated incident. And then finally, just on retention, if you do put a lot of time and energy into training people, and in our industry it takes years for somebody to really be able to say that they're an expert, for them to have to leave or partially exempt themselves from the industry because of childcare is also very unfortunate and a wasted investment.
Carla, do you have, am I right, is it an all-female staff?
We did manage to get a guy to work with us, so we do now have a Daryl who works with us. But we are.
And how many staff members?
So there are 3 on staff, and then everybody else is at 1099. And for brokers, like whether residential or commercial, they're paid on commission, and it's very much like a time spent in equals the dollars that you get. And it's a high risk situation. Commercial transactions are very long. There's long gaps between payments, so we have a very high bar to entry. And when you layer on the childcare thing, it almost becomes impossible. And I think the only reason why I'm even here and doing it and have managed to grow a bigger business is because I haven't had kids until much older. Is the truth, not really. So I work for Gibbons Communities. Gibbons Communities is an aging services organization. We provide long-term care for the aging population. We have 2 skilled nursing facilities, one in Black Mountain and one in Asheville. We have an assisted living facility, which is at our Asheville campus, and we also have a lot of independent living residents as well. And our industry is heavily female dominated. Last time we ran the numbers, which was just a couple months ago, I think 66% of our 560 employees are female. The majority of those would work in CNA positions, nursing positions, which there's already a shortage of, right? Even before COVID, which was just exacerbated during the pandemic. And we saw a lot of people leave because they could not secure childcare.
men and women. We had several, and it was mostly CNAs because they are making the lower wages. This is also the case with our environmental services staff, also dining. These are essential to our residents' survival, really. So we're in a difficult place as far as an increase in demand for the services we provide, but also our decrease in being able to staff and provide the care that we want.
Great. So I think we know, this is an issue that affects us across the sector. Himanshu is ready to go straight to policy fixes. I want to take us one step back first, and I know that a lot of you have come to us and wanted to talk about this issue. What have you tried to do as employers on this issue that either worked or didn't? I can start
over here. Okay. So this was a conversation that we started before COVID. The HR team really was passionate about trying to figure something out, but we just didn't really know where to start. We still kind of don't. It's been an ongoing conversation. We've tried to, update our policies to be able to be more flexible. You're dealing with people who work 12-hour shifts and allowing them to leave to go and pick up their child from childcare and then come back, whereas, but then there are labor laws that go into that too. If it takes them less than 30 minutes, we have to pay them for that, and then that could be a safety concern. So trying to navigate that. We've started a couple of different conversations trying to reach out to other organizations and maybe see if they want to come up with like a partnership or something. We've played with the idea of maybe looking into creating our own childcare. However, with the regs, we're not sure how we could make that happen, and we are a nonprofit. I forgot to add that as well. So trying to figure out how we would even fund it, because all of the grant money that we're getting is going into funding affordable housing for seniors, right? So we are trying everything we can to kind of try and be as flexible as possible right now, but we don't have a really good starting point to actually put something in place to provide childcare or a childcare subsidy.
We try to be flexible and we adjust people's targets and that sort of thing. But the easiest thing for like a small business to do to even indicate that you care about this is look at your scheduling. So we don't have any like company meetings before 10 a.m. in order to allow people to drop off, kind of catch up on their stuff, come to the meeting present and organized. And not stressed, and we don't meet after 2:30, and that's just one little like subtle way that you can indicate like, hey, I recognize like you've got like a full day before you even get here to do anything, and so we focused on that. We've looked at subsidizing people who want to come on in order to help them pay for childcare, but the reality is with the cost that like what we could do as a small business was like not moving the needle, even doing more than what you can get federally. It's not enough, and this area in particular is under a lot of demand strain.
So what's going on at the YMCA that's innovative?
The Y is a pretty child-friendly place, so I think we're in a better position. We have worked in the last few years pretty comprehensively with our HR department to make sure that we have flexible scheduling for our staff. Everybody can basically bring your kid to work. Like even with our centers, there's at our gyms, there's childcare available, and so I think we all just work together. Even at our corporate meetings, sometimes there's just toddlers running around. So it is, it's a cultural piece of the Y.
I think flexibility is what I heard, and that's what we've started doing. What we've been doing, and we're just more focused on it, is offer flexible scheduling. Now, being tourism, hospitality, hotels, we're open 24/7, 365, and certain shifts, like front desk, for example, there's much limited, but we're still being creative on that, where somebody can't come because their partner is watching the kid until a certain time and they have to come afterwards. we work with that. So we have individuals that work for us that come in at 5 rather than 3. But then it goes to explain to the others, okay, you've got to cover their shifts, and so it's a conversation that we've had with our staff. Housekeeping is another example where, and this goes to kids that are in to school. So like leaving at 2:30 to pick up the children and not come back to work. So we have successfully done that where we're offering incentives to housekeepers, saying if we have more housekeepers, everybody can leave on time, and you're saving this much money if you're not sending your children to after school. Now, some of them do avail the Y services, for example, or other nonprofits that offer stuff. But I think the incentive for them is that yes, you're losing some hours, but you're not spending that money on childcare. At the same time, your workload is manageable. And as a business, all my rooms are clean by 2 or 3 o'clock. I can check my guest in. So it worked out okay. It's still a challenge with that, but it has been successful where they have incentive of they get some money if they help us find more housekeepers. Does it work all the time? No. Like I said, some shifts are hard to fill. The other thing we also realized is a lot of, even though we're customer facing, a lot of our sales, for example, can be done online. So we do offer the flexibility that you can work from home. There's metrics we track to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do, but that's flexibility we offer. And it's a little bit better with that to get people on board, but we feel like working with our employees, just talking to them, listening to them, what the challenges are is helped quite a bit.
We're going to make sure we've got plenty of time for our audience to ask some questions, but we'll go to the policy. I mean, what would you like to see local, state, federal?
Oh my
what would you
goodness.
like to see the government do?
So I did read the report, page, all the 7, 8 pages. It's just, there's a lot of numbers on there. There's a lot of, but the reality is, money is not going to solve this problem. Yes, we need the funding, we need to have that. I think what I hear, and Greg's here, and a few other folks, Amy's here, you see some over in our center. I think and I'm not an expert, I don't have charts, but this is just talking to people, listening to what is actually happening. We just don't have enough facilities to, whether you have the funding or not, you can't just find childcare. And early education, I think we talked about that as well. Much like you, when I was on the chamber board, we talked about that quite a bit and how important that is. And to me, how do you, I sit on the NC Works Commission, which is a statewide commission that is looking to get workforce ready, not only currently for the jobs we have, but for the future jobs. How do we get our workforce ready? And early childhood education is a huge component of that. We also look at declining birth rates and how does that impact immigration, how does that impact all those things. But I think at the state level, at least, one of my things has been is to focus on early childcare, whether it's the pre-K through 12 or even before pre-K. And we've been able to add that to the list of priorities that we've presented to the governor's office on funding. And I know money is part of that, and as I said, money is not the solution. But how do we get more of the YMCAs? How do we get more facilities in place? And if you look at Buncombe County and Asheville, to open a facility, just the rent, for example, or just the land cost. So we're going to have to be innovative and creative in solving this problem. It's not going to come from policy, it's not going to come from government. I think it's everybody in this room, business, nonprofits, and for-profits, and government. We have to get together and solve this. We've been working on it. We've been talking about it for a long time. It's hard to do, but I think the time is now. I mean, there's opportunity to make something that is innovative and different than what other communities might have done. The other thing on all of this is we're talking about hiring is also housing, for example, right? So when you're looking at housing, we're looking at building affordable housing. How do you incorporate childcare facilities in the housing centers itself? How do you do that? And then there's a lot of thinking. There's a lot of talk going on. I'm much like Kit. I want to see action. We want to see things happening. We want to see things moving in the right direction. There's a lot of funding available here locally as well, with a lot of nonprofits. There's a big one in town that has the capacity to help a lot, and I think we need to be able to advocate to them as well. When you're looking at housing, when you're looking at how do we incorporate childcare and into that model. there are a lot of local small groups that are doing a lot of innovative things that have been doing for a long time under the radar, that that we need to go talk to them and understand how they do it, how they fund it, how they're able to run programs. Now they're not licensed and all those things, I get that, but they're running daycare centers. I don't say they're not daycare centers. They're centers where kids get dropped off and then they get cared for. I mean, and they're not at home alone, and they're
not in a car waiting for a parent.
They're not in a car waiting for a parent. And I was born and raised in India, and I've been in America longer than I've lived in India, but in my adult life I've been here, and it's there's a lot to say about family dynamics. I feel like, and this is not policy. You asked me to come talk, so. So I think the family dynamic piece is important as well. I think as we're looking at the challenge we face right now, yes, there is the option of childcare in this, but like grandparents, for example, like what a resource, right? And we have.
Well, so I would just like to say that if you have an affordability crisis and you don't have enough people in the workforce and people are having to work longer, that idea of like, oh, the grandparents or the sister is going to take care of kids is gradually getting eroded. I come from the UK, and there is more of an emphasis on like interfamily care, but I think us pretending that like the nuclear family still exists for everybody and that's like a viable solution to like a crisis caused by like 1,000 different factors is oversimplification.
Sure.
I don't think we can like rely on that.
So I'm not saying that's what, no, but I just was telling Carol that we just hired somebody that moved from Colorado over here to Asheville because one of the partners' family lives here, and as they were looking to have children, they moved closer to their family so they don't have to worry about childcare. And now they're both husband and wife are working. I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm saying that's part of the solution.
So I wanted to just interject a couple, like right before the pandemic happened, I started working on this project because we kept having towns and communities come to us and say, open a child care center, and we kept saying, do you have $10 million? Because that's what it's gonna take to open a child care center, which isn't actually the investment, that's gonna solve it for 100 people, and we've got thousands of kids who need care, and that's not really a solution. So what we started looking at is how can we actually address the problem, and so what we were looking at is like, what are we good at? And one thing that the Y is good at is regulatory, like mastering the whole regulatory environment. We've got 30 remote facilities. Our staff are very young. They're spread out across multiple counties, so we have to be able to spin up dealing with licensing. And licensing is the thing that turns a lot of people away from doing childcare because the regulatory environment is extremely overwhelming and can be very punitive, or can at least be perceived that way. And it's required. You must be licensed to do early childhood or you're violating the law. So what we're looking at, we've got a grant from Dogwood, and we're working with Southwest Child Development, which has a grant from the state to essentially support family child care homes in business services. So doing all of the paperwork, registration, all of the staff and training is a huge component of what gets overwhelming in licensed childcare. Doing all of the billing services, all of the tax services for individuals who want to operate a family childcare home, which is also a very overwhelming job, because if you're operating a family childcare home, you are a human providing 50 hours of care and then being expected to do all of the paperwork of a small business on top of that, and it's too much, which is why that industry has completely collapsed since 2013. So prior to 2013, there was a fairly robust industry of family childcare homes. There are 2 in Region 8, which is west of us. I think there's 14 in Buncombe County. But like looking to essentially redevelop that field and like provide people with just tools, like here, you can sign up for this and we'll do all of the back-end office work and you can just submit a few documents over the internet. That's gonna require the state, just being a little bit
Sure.
more rational. So the state passes legislation about you must, like they change building codes, they change health codes, they change codes about the pipes. They do a lot of things without offering any support systems, and they say you must comply with this in 6 months, which is very hard for someone who is operating a business out of a house. So like there are legislative priorities to push down the pike, but if there's, you know, small businesses as well, like Gibbons Estate, or, you know, companies that say, hey, we'd like to operate a small childcare center now in our business because we've got to serve our families, that's another way to do that and get through all the licensing hoops. So that's one of the things that Dogwood's supporting that we're trying to, you know, push through. I think we have to think creatively about how to do small things everywhere quickly, because doing great big things like building a center is not going to be especially helpful in the short term or in the long term.
Yeah, I
Talk
would.
about 42 and 43, short term.